You think you overtrade because you lack discipline, or because you're greedy, or because you just need better rules. Well, that's the surface explanation. But if it were that simple, you would have fixed already, right? You know your rules. You know your risk. You know you shouldn't take that third setup. And yet you do. So what's actually happening? Overtrading isn't usually about money. It's about discomfort. The quiet kind. The kind you don't label. Because when the market is moving, you feel engaged, alert, focused. There's structure. There's purpose. There's something to respond to. But when nothing is happening, when price is slow, when your setup hasn't formed, when you're just sitting there waiting, that's when it creeps in. Restlessness, boredom, the urge to do something. And like most traders, you're misinterpreting that urge as opportunity. But it's not opportunity. It's intolerance for stillness. The market isn't forcing you to trade. Silence is. And silence feels uncomfortable to you who is used to stimulation. So you click, not because the setup is clean, but because doing something feels better than doing nothing. And that's the quiet reason you overtrade. You're not chasing profit. You're escaping stillness. You tell yourself you're impatient. You tell yourself you need more discipline. But that's not what's happening. You're uncomfortable, and you don't like sitting in it. When the market slows down, your mind speeds up. You start scanning harder. You start lowering your standards. You start convincing yourself that this setup is close enough. It's not that you don't know better. You do. But waiting feels heavier than pulling the trigger. Because when you're in a trade, at least something is happening. There's movement. There's engagement. There's a reason to focus. When you're flat, you're alone with your thoughts. And that's where the real tension is. Overtrading is often a distraction, a way to avoid sitting with uncertainty, a way to avoid the quiet voice that says, what if nothing sets up today? What if you miss the move? What if you're falling behind? So you take something, anything, just to relieve that pressure. The trade becomes emotional relief, not strategic execution, and the relief feels good for a moment. Until the consequences show up. Then you promise yourself you won't do it again. But unless you learn how to tolerate stillness, you will. Because this isn't a rule problem. It's a nervous system problem. You say you want consistency, but your behavior says you crave action. Look at your pattern. The market slows down, and you feel flat. The market spikes, and you feel alive. That's not strategy. That's stimulation. Trading gives you microdoses of intensity, anticipation, risk, reward, uncertainty. Your brain loves that combination. And when there's no setup, no movement, no volatility, your brain feels deprived. So you manufacture action. You drop to a lower time frame. You widen your criteria. You tell yourself you're being adaptive, but you're not adapting. You're feeding the need for engagement. Overtrading isn't random. It usually happens when you're bored, or when you're coming off a win and want that same hit again, or after a loss when you want to feel back in control. In every case, it's emotional activation. You're trying to change how you feel, and the trade becomes the fastest tool to do that. The problem? The market doesn't reward emotional regulation through activity. It rewards emotional regulation through restraint. And restraint feels unnatural when your nervous system is wired for stimulation. That's why you keep clicking. Not because you're reckless, but because action feels safer than stillness. You keep telling yourself to be more disciplined. That's too vague. Discipline fails when the environment makes bad decisions easy. And right now, it's too easy for you to click. One button. Instant execution. No pause. No interruption. So when the urge hits, there's nothing slowing you down. That's why willpower keeps losing. You're relying on emotion to fight emotion. Instead, you need friction. Make overtrading harder. Not emotionally. Physically. Add a rule that forces a pause before every entry. A written checklist you must complete by hand. a mandatory 5-minute timer before execution, a max trade limit per session that locks you out. Friction gives your logical brain time to wake up. Because overtrading usually happens fast, it's impulsive. It bypasses analysis. When you slow the process down, urgency fades. And when urgency fades, clarity increases. You don't eliminate the urge. You outlast it. Urges peak, then they fall. But if execution is instant, you act at the peak. Add friction, and you act after the peak. That's control, not forcing yourself to feel differently, but building a structure that protects you when you don't. Is this video resonating with you? Let me know in the comments. And please make sure you hit the like button so it can be seen by more traders who need it. Now, let me hit you with the truth. You need a no-trade identity. And here's why. Right now, part of your identity is built around being active. You feel productive when you're in trades. You feel sharp when you're executing. You feel like a trader when you're doing something. That's the trap. Because the real edge in trading is selective inactivity. You don't get paid for activity. You get paid for precision. So if you want to control overtrading, you need to shift your identity. You need to become someone who takes pride in not trading. Someone who wins by sitting. Someone who measures discipline and skips setups, not taken ones. Start tracking no trade days. Log them. Celebrate them. Build psychological reward around restraint. Right now your brain only rewards action. Flip it. Reward patience. When you see a marginal setup and pass, that's a win. When you stop at your daily limit, that's a win. When you feel the urge and don't act, that's a bigger win than any green candle. If you only feel successful when you're in a position, you will overtrade forever. But if you start identifying as someone who protects capital aggressively, overtrading becomes inconsistent with who you are, and behavior always follows identity. Pay attention to when you overtrade. It's rarely random. It happens after a loss, after a big win, after a missed move, after a boring session. In other words, when you're emotionally elevated. Loss, you want it back. Win, you feel invincible. Missed trade, you feel behind. Slow market, you feel restless. Every one of those states has one thing in common. You're not neutral, and neutrality is where clean execution lives. When your emotions spike, positive or negative, your standards drop. You justify entries faster. You interpret noise as signal. You convince yourself the trade makes sense. But if you were calm, you'd pass. That's why one of the most powerful controls you can build is an emotional rule, not just a market rule. For example, after 2 consecutive losses, you're done for the session. After one oversized win, mandatory 20-minute break. After missing a move, no entry for the next candle cycle. You're not protecting your account. You're protecting your state. Because overtrading isn't a strategy flaw. It's an emotional spike problem. Control the spike. You control the behavior. Now to the deeper part. I want you to be honest with yourself. When you take a clean setup, part of you still feels uneasy, right? You're in. Risk is defined. Plan is clear. And yet, you keep scanning. You keep looking for more. Why? Because you don't fully trust that one trade is enough. Enough for the day. Enough for the week. Enough for progress. So you stack. You layer. You hunt for a second entry. A third. Not because the system requires it, but because you don't trust the math. You don't trust the edge to play out over time. You want to accelerate the outcome. You want certainty. And certainty doesn't exist here. So you try to manufacture it through volume. More trades feels like more control. More exposure feels like more opportunity. But if your edge is real, you don't need more trades. You need more repetitions of discipline. Overtrading is often hidden distrust. Distrust in your system. Distrust in probability. Distrust in patience. So you compensate with activity. The solution? Define your maximum trades before the session begins. Decide what enough looks like in advance. And when you hit it, stop, even if the market is still moving. Especially if the market is still moving. Because the real flex in trading isn't catching every move. It's walking away when you've done your job. And here's the truth. You don't overtrade because you're careless. You overtrade because, in the moment, you need something. Stimulation, relief, validation, control. And the trade feels like the fastest way to get it. That's why telling yourself, just stop, never works. You're trying to remove the behavior without replacing the need. Real control starts when you stop using the market to regulate your emotions. When boredom doesn't scare you. When missing a move doesn't shake you. When one clean trade actually feels like enough. When flat feels powerful. That's when overtrading loses its grip. Because now you're not reacting. You're choosing. And choosing requires space. Space between the urge and the click. Space between emotion and execution. If you build friction, if you reward restraint, if you protect your emotional state, if you define enough before you start, you won't eliminate the urge, but you'll stop obeying it. And that's the shift. So let me ask you something direct. When you overtrade, what are you actually trying to feel? Drop in the comments. Are you bored? Do you seek control? Is it about revenge? Be honest. We're all in this together. Let's catch up in the comments. And if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. And check out my other videos. See you in the next one.